Well, hi for everyone just joining today's webinar. We'll just give it a few more moments. We had quite a few people register for today, so we'll just get a few moments for everybody to join the session, and we'll be starting shortly. For those that have just joined, we're just giving it a bit more time for people to join in to the webinar. We've had quite a few people register for today's session, so I'm just watching on the screen as I'm talking to you. Our participants start to creep up quite rapidly. So we'll start very shortly, and thanks for joining us today. Okay, well, let's make a start. So thank you everyone for joining today's webinar on energy in transition, rethinking transmission and distribution in the race for our clean energy future. My name is Michael Adini, and I'm a member of the Group Executive at Engineers Australia. I'm also a mechanical engineer, and my role and capacity as a Group Executive with Engineers Australia is I run our operations and assessments team. And it is my absolute pleasure to be your facilitator for today's webinar. I'm joined by our panelists, Diana Alonso, Adam Geely, and Felicity Galuzzo, who I'll formally introduce in just a moment. But before we do, I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands at which we're meeting today. I'm facilitating today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. We acknowledge and honour the unbroken spiritual, cultural, and political connection they have maintained to this unique place for more than 2,000 generations. And we're all joining the webinar from various locations across Australia today. So I'd also like to acknowledge the other traditional owners of the various locations at which you are respectively joining today's call from today. Before we kick off into our webinar today and our panelists, just some quick housekeeping. So part of today's webinar will be interactive discussion amongst our panelists. And hopefully that's what you have joined to see here today. But would also, just in terms of housekeeping, would like to make sure that if you could please have your cameras and microphones off. They should automatically be turned off, but would like to, however, have your participation in today's webinar through a couple of means. We have a poll that would really love to hear your perspectives and thoughts on. So very shortly we'll get to a poll question. And we also have under the Q&A function within Zoom, the opportunity for you to submit your questions that you might have. And time permitting towards the end of the webinar, we'll try our best to get to those questions. But I would like to acknowledge and thank everyone who sent through their questions via the registration page in advance of today. Again, we'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can, and that will be towards the end of the session. We'll make some time and space for that. And by the way, don't worry, often when we come to these things, we hear these insights and we're frantically trying to scribble down everything we heard. Please, no need to do that. We will be sending out after today's webinar a recording of the webinar for your reference, which we hope should be sometime within the next week. And now it's time to formally introduce our panelists. I'll keep the introductions brief, but for your reference, what you will find is inside the chat, you'll find a more detailed biography of each of our panelists. But I'd like to welcome to our panel today, Diana Alonso, who is the Networks Project Development Manager for Iberdrola. I'd like to also welcome Adam Geely as the General Manager for Network Services for City Power and for Powercorp. And I'd also like to welcome Felicity Galuzzo, is the Director of Energy for WSP Australia. So welcome, panelists. We're looking very much to hearing your insights to today's conversation. Okay, now just before we jump into our panel, just a bit of context. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. And looking at the screen, it looks like I think most of our participants have now joined, just been watching that number go up over those last few moments. But thanks again for everyone for joining us as we explore the future of transmission and distribution in the urgent shift towards a cleaner energy future. And as global demand for renewable energy soars, our infrastructure must keep pace with the remarkable speed and agility. And this is a topic I do know from the perspective of Engineers Australia that we're extremely passionate about, particularly across the role the engineering profession can play in that future. But building on the networks that we need to power a sustainable future is by no measure an easy thing to do. It's quite complex. It requires overcoming critical resource constraints, addressing very complex technical challenges, and accelerating talent development and addressing skill shortages along the way. According to the Australian government, by 2050, we need an estimated 10,000 kilometres of transmission lines. So that's an amazingly large number, huge order of magnitude there. So it's a huge challenge we have in front of us, and we really look forward to hearing the thoughts and insights from today's panelists about how can we respond to that. In today's discussion, our panelists will dive into a few obstacles and we'll examine some of the innovative strategies and solutions that help us move forward. So we hope you find some relevance and applicability for your own organisation and your own circumstances there. We'll cover a range of topics. Those topics will include overcoming infrastructure bottlenecks. They'll include fostering collaboration to avoid project delays, and I know we've all experienced those at some point. Adopting digital solutions to streamline timelines. We'll also look at getting a balance between global education frameworks with local needs to cultivate the skilled workforce and skills in the right places for this transformation to occur. And we're really excited today to bring you insights from leaders across the industry. We encourage you to engage with us throughout the discussion, and together, let's consider how we can fast track our progress towards a cleaner energy future. But before we begin our audience Q&A, let's start with a quick poll. So we're about to find out more about your perspective, what we need for a clean energy transition. And you'll see on the screen, it's just popped up now, is a poll. And what we would invite you to do, there's a number of questions on this poll. The question that we're trying to answer from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest priority for your organisation in developing the workforce to support the clean energy rollout? I should just clarify, this is a single choice. So while many of these answers might resonate with you, we really are asking you to choose amongst your children here and just pick one. So we'll just give it a few moments for people to select which they feel is the biggest priority for their organisation. And we'll just give it another moment for more people to complete the poll. And then we'll share these results. Okay, hopefully you've all had a chance to select. And here comes the result. So hopefully on screen you can see right now. Interesting, upskilling the current workforce to adapt to new technologies definitely seems to be the one resonating with most of today's webinar participants. Excellent. And the good news is, I'm sure we'll discuss that in depth with the expert panelists, but we'll also touch on the other topics as well. So thank you for completing the poll. And now it's time that many of you have all been waiting for, and that's to hear from our panel. So I'd like to open today's webinar with our first panel question. And I'd invite either panelist to jump in with this particular question, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. In one sentence, how would you describe the current state of transmission and distribution in Australia? So I invite either panel member to jump in with that one.
Happy to start, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Dana.
I will describe it as adapting to change. We're changing the origin of the generation from the source of the generation, from the location of the generation, and basically the network has to adapt to it.
Yes.
In a pretty tight time frame.
Yes. So we need to adapt rapidly to the change in front of us.
Rapidly.
And Felicity or Adam, your views?
I'll jump in there. I think we know what to do. We need to work together to figure out how to best do it and to bring all of our communities on that journey with us.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you, Felicity. And Adam?
Yeah, from my point of view, I see the challenges as a little different in each. So I'm going to cheat and take a sentence for each part of the industry. I think in distribution, we're in transition with a rapid orientation towards our customers and technology to squeeze more out of the assets. And in transmission, I see it as somewhat different. I think the industry's been re-energized with all the opportunities to build new lines after a long period of maintenance. And it's kind of like a country in the Olympics who performed very well at the marathon for a long time, trying to work out how to win the sprint competition. So I see transmission as very exciting at the moment.
I like that analogy, actually. And just speaking of other countries, if you look at Olympics, we love a competitive nature of the Olympics and seeing our countries compete. Now, I'll ask this question not from a viewpoint of competition, but more from comparison, learning, and benchmarking. How do you feel this sort of compares to other countries across the globe internationally? Do you have a view?
I'll jump in there. I do regularly talk to my global colleagues about transmission and distribution and the clean energy rollout. And I think Australia is definitely not unique in any way. We are up against all the same battles that everybody else is. We're in a global competition for the resources to deliver the projects we all need. And different countries have different generation mixes and you know, their own unique demand needs and so forth. But the one thing that everybody has in common is that transmission and distribution networks need to be built out and upgraded to align with not just the rollout of renewables, but also, you know, bringing things such as data centers online and all of our future needs in the energy markets.
I think well said, Felicity. There's a lot of conversation on generation and storage, but definitely this part of the equation perhaps doesn't get the level of conversation it needs to have for us to deliver this clean future.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I think that Victoria in particular, with a high penetration of smart meters, has got the opportunity to lead parts of the world in how to integrate those smart meters and get value. You know, we see the LV network now across our businesses as much more of a transmission network with energy flowing two-way and trying to actually maintain voltages and stability and things like that. So definitely it's changing. I think, you know, some of the jurisdictions have solved some of the problems we face and we should learn from them. But I also think there's an opportunity in Australia for us to lead as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. And finally, Dan, do you have any thoughts?
I have to agree with both Felicity and Adam. It's definitely,
Yes.
we're not unique on that situation. Everywhere else in the world is going through the same transition we are, which it obviously makes it a bit more challenging in terms of resources, supply chains, or we're all fighting for the same thing, I'd say.
Yes.
But it also comes with the opportunity to learn from other countries that maybe they are a few years ahead of us, which started the transition earlier just because of the nature of the needs. And I do see opportunity there. As Felicity, I also speak quite frequently with colleagues from other countries. And there is pretty good learning opportunities that we can definitely implement in Australia. And again, as Adam said as well, I'm sure there is some learnings in here that we can export to our colleagues overseas.
Excellent. Thanks, Dana. So some clear messages from our panel there that we may not be unique in all the challenges, and there's definitely opportunities from learning globally, but we also have the opportunity to lead as well. So I think what I heard there. So, well, let's tackle our next question for the panel. And this one might be one I think perhaps for Adam or Diana, is given the urgency of connecting renewable energy projects, what's the most promising approach you're seeing to overcoming infrastructure bottlenecks at both local and global sort of levels?
I think from my perspective, it starts with the customer. You know, what our customers value for large connections is consistency of delivery and fast delivery. Definitely those companies have options to deploy their projects around the globe, essentially, a lot of the big players, and they're definitely looking at the risk in terms of the delivery of the network assets to keep up with their development profile. And I think locally that your business model plays a big part into that. So resourcing is obviously one of the key things. You know, we've got largely an in-source field workforce and construction workforce. And we feel in many ways that gives us a bit of a competitive edge in terms of speed, particularly given that we can manage those resources. We don't rely on others so much. I think being flexible and consultative with stakeholders, particularly through planning permits and with the community, is really important to progress your project. And it's a bit of a more speed, less haste type of approach that works best there from our experience. And I think in construction, we need to be really mindful of the role of the trades unions and how they impact the delivery of major infrastructure projects in particular. And I feel that, you know, we've embraced them as a stakeholder. They give us a lot of feedback. They're pretty tough in their feedback, but it makes us a better business and makes us better leaders, listening to it and trying to work through how we can improve things. And the last thing that I sort of see for our industry is supply chain risk associated with the wars that are going on at the moment. I remember early in my professional career when we had the Gulf Wars, we did see lead times for electrical equipment increase as we saw those countries rebuild after the conflict. So for us, they are all the things we would keep a close eye on.
Interesting. Thanks very much for that, Adam. Diana, would welcome your views.
Definitely. So I'm probably looking at this issue from both perspectives, from the generation perspective, given the renewable business we have, and also from the network perspective and the connection side of things to the renewable to the network. Pretty common issue is resourcing, supply chains, and also the planning approvals. So the fact that they're completely different from state to state, council to council, it doesn't help to speed up the process. That's one thing from, let's say, from the developer side of things. Is the capacity in the network as well. So a lot of projects get delayed, constrained, because they won't be able to export the energy they meant to be exporting, which normally translates in, you know, it doesn't make sense financially, therefore slows down or stops, which is not helping to the overall target of you know, making, you know, the zero target. So that's one of the issues. How can we improve that? From my perspective, I think collaboration is the key. Being able to work together, try to streamline the processes, standardize as much as we can. So try to copy paste as much as possible. Obviously, it's going to be specific requirements that can be standardized, but the more we can standardize, the easier it's going to be. From the transmission perspective, excuse me, obviously transmission lines are critical. So the more capacity we have in transmission lines, the more or the easier it's going to be for developers to connect their projects. And it goes from generation to load as well. So it's also needed for data centers, for example. That is definitely critical. From the supply chain, I'd probably say as well, standardization. So the more we can standardize the equipment, the easier it's going to be to manufacture. Remember, as we discussed before, is everywhere else is going through the same type of equipment. Yes. We're fighting against each other. So the more it can be off the shelf equipment, the quicker it's going to be the delivery times, which sometimes is the bottleneck for most of the projects. So
that makes perfect sense.
It's a combination, I'll say. It's not a single solution, it's a combination.
Yeah. I think you paint a very compelling picture there, the importance of standardization from what I hear, Diana, particularly in terms of bringing projects online and also maintaining assets as well throughout their life cycle. I also heard the theme come through to resonate with a lot of our participants today, particularly about resourcing. And I think Adam, you touched there on the topic of insourcing that, which shores up your resourcing, much more control over it, the ability to do that. And I think you also touched, both of you touched actually on the need for focusing on supply chain as well, security of supply chain. I know that sovereign resilience is a big topic in this nation right now for that very reason. So excellent insights. Thank you. Well, why don't we jump, actually, Felicity, would you like to weigh into that one? I haven't turned to you yet, but just give the opportunity.
I think that there are certainly no shortages of challenges, and we are on a journey that I think we can see where the end is. Exactly how we get to that end point, who knows? It's going to be a difficult journey. But I think the one thing that we do have on our side at the moment really is that there is a shared vision of where we're going. And I think anything that supports certainty in what we're doing and how we're going to get there helps all the issues around. It doesn't solve them, but it certainly helps in terms of supply chain and resourcing, because there's a lot of players who are looking to invest a lot of money and effort, and to really be able to shore that up and ensure that, you know, we're all getting returns on that investment, not just financially, but if, you know, we're going to develop up workforces of people, we need them to be able to then use those new skills. I think the more we can lock in that certainty, then the greater, especially in a global competitive market, the greater our chances of really trying to get ahead of the 8 ball and move forward and win the race. If it's a race, yes.
Well said. And we are competing globally in that race.
Yes.
Okay, let's turn to our next panel question for today. Adam, I might turn to you for this question. And I know this is a topic that many of our participants today will have front of mind, and we all know about the conversation across the nation today about generative AI. But would love your views and perspectives on what role can digital solutions such as Gen AI and predictive analysis play in accelerating project timelines?
Yeah, I guess with the introduction of smart meters in Victoria, we insourced, I guess, a team of data scientists to start playing around with AI and predictive analytics. So, you know, we were able to, I guess, capitalize on a capability that you can use more broadly across the business. And what we found is with the smart meter AI, we're able to predict faults that are emerging and not yet have impacted supply and switch them off ahead of time and dispatch crews. It also saved a lot of money in routine testing of meters across Victoria. And if you look at our businesses, City Power and Powercore, we've got around 1.1 million customers. So that's a lot of effort saved in a resource-constrained market. Additionally, you know, we've used those sort of algorithms to predict or to sense shocks in the network or issues with the network that could be a safety concern in our customers' premises. So we're able to either switch them off or send a crew out immediately, and seen our safety stats with respect to people being shocked in their homes reduce substantially. So taking that evolution forward, and as the business gets used to AI, we've started to use it for construction and operation of our business. So, you know, we use machine learning and AI, I guess, to optimize our maintenance program in terms of inspection and construction to smooth it out, leading to a safer delivery of a program. It's less peaky. We've also used it for veg management to try and forecast tree growth and how we manage vegetation around power line assets. Coupled with LiDAR technology as well. And we bought helicopters to fly our networks to gather that data and process it. And we also use AI and machine learning for load forecasting and things like that based on weather forecasts. So definitely the utilities are getting smarter and smarter. And what that means, I guess, is that we can make decisions more decisively. We don't rely on our own thoughts or beliefs to come up with improvements in the business. We trust the data and try and make sense of that. And some of the things we've been playing with recently are optimizing our fault dispatch to make sure that we get our customers back on supply as quickly as possible. And we've recently started using that for construction as well. So, you know, for our programs of work and based on the regions and how wet the soil is, there's a lot of data that comes into it. We've found that if we optimize the program for delivery the right time of year, we can save 30% of our field labor. So what that translates to is our ability to move faster. We're not wasting labor trying to hit a deadline. We're being really smart and decisive about how we use our labor to get the most done with what we've got, and make the most of our labor in a resource-constrained environment. So, you know, it's really exciting sort of evolution. I've been quite surprised. I always felt that, you know, doing things the right time of year or right location would save money, but I never, and effort, but I never thought it would be that sort of scale. So, you know, overall, I think we're continuing to evolve and learn and use this data. But one thing I'd say about transmission and distribution, we're exceptionally data-rich organisations and can definitely use that to optimise.
Interesting. And I imagine, Adam, in addition to, the load balancing, the safety components that you just spoke to, I imagine for the ultimate energy consumer, there's also an optimization element that they can also benefit for to make their energy spend go as further as possible for them. So
absolutely. I mean, we're incentivized really well by our regulators. If we can save money for every dollar we spend, we get to sort of keep for 5 years 30 cents of it, and the customer gets the 70 cents back in the next 5 years, and after that the customer gets all of it. So from our perspective, we think the regulatory incentives are well weighted to drive the customer outcomes.
yes.
And I'd say the conservatism around the use of our network, now that we've got a whole lot of data around energy use, dynamic envelopes for generators and for loads like data centers, is something that we are on the verge of being able to offer.
Yes. Well, just on this theme, I'm interested in your thoughts, Diana. It's quite often one of the byproducts we get of innovation and technological advancement is it doesn't come without risk. We're trying new things. We don't know how it's going to play out all the time, but be interested in your view, how we balance the demand, the need for the rate of innovation we need to have for this clean energy future, and how do we balance the need for reliability and safety with that level of kind of innovation that we need to invest in?
That's a very good point, Michael. Definitely, I mean, as the industry grows and there is more demand for it, innovation obviously improves. What we call innovation, it may not be reinventing the wheel. So sometimes it's just something that has been already proven and used somewhere else that we can implement in Australia. And then from there is, a deviation, an improvement that can be exported back somewhere else. So I think quite a few things that, get transferred across the world, different structures, different technologies, different type of equipment, different methodologies like use of drones, for example. That is something that, again, reduces the amount of labor required, improves safety. It is a fantastic improvement. It's innovation, it's optimization. And how did it come through? Basically triggered by needs. So sometimes it's, again, goes back to collaboration from my perspective. So it's nothing, it doesn't need to be like something completely new that never been used before, never has seen life before. It can be something that has been done somewhere else.
Yes. It doesn't have to necessarily, as you're sort of saying, sometimes applying existing innovation in new context or setting, almost retrofitting, is innovation itself rather than reinventing it from first principles. Yeah.
And
Sorry,
I
Adam,
don't think, I don't think it actually adds a lot to risk in general, and particularly safety risk. If I think of all the key innovations that our business has undertaken in the distribution industry, often it's improved public safety risk. You're trying to get more out of your workforce and more out of your assets to keep costs low for customers. But at the same time, you're able to reduce the risk. Smoothing a program means we don't rush at certain times of the year. And prioritizing the restoration after faults, for instance, allows us to get customers back on supply quicker, to attend those high-risk events where you've got wires down on the ground much more rapidly. So, from my perspective, I've found that actually enhances our safety performance in most cases.
Yes.
I will agree with Adam on that one, but I think it's more of the perception, especially regarding reliability of the network when you introduce some innovations. And I agree with you. It's normally more about the perception than the actual risk.
Yeah, sometimes the fear of something can be greater than the reality of it, but there's a real how you use the innovation is a big part of the de-risking equation, or perception of de-risking, by the sounds of it. Yeah. Well, why don't we turn to our next topic? And Felicity, I might invite you for your views on this particular one. Is, in your experience, how do you feel we can foster meaningful collaboration between government bodies, the private sector, local communities to streamline the approval process and reduce project delays? And I think you touched on this earlier in today's webinar.
Well, I don't think I have all the answers. If anyone does, please put it into the chat because I would be very interested. I mean, look, the our energy industry is highly regulated, and there have been, for the last almost 3 decades, there are rules where people have been told to stay in their lane and slapped if they dare stray out of it. So we've created this industry where everyone plays their role and doesn't really think too much out of it, and everyone's ring fenced in a way. And now we've come to a point where actually that model doesn't serve us well, and we have to open up that collaboration. And I think there's probably been a natural collaboration within transmission and distribution networks because they haven't been in competition with each other. So there's been good sharing of information and so forth. Probably at the moment, just because of skill shortages, there's a lot of people moving around the industry, and that in itself fosters collaboration because everyone's a former colleague of someone else. I've got a former colleague, Adam, in the call right here. So I think that things have really been shaken up, and we continue to build on that. And one thing, and probably a little bit selfishly from me, but one thing, good example I think of collaboration and around resourcing is understanding the challenges, the common challenge that we all face in trying to upskill and reskill people. So I had an example on one of our projects within the last 12 months or so, where we were sending a senior person to site to do an inspection on the site. And we asked our client if we could send a junior person. Well, our plan was to send a junior person with that senior person, and we already actually had a junior person on the site, and we wanted them to both join this senior person in the inspection. And our client said no. And I was like, okay, didn't think it was that controversial a request. So we tried to make it really clear there was no additional cost here. This was a training exercise. We were trying to develop our young people. Again, we said the person who was already on site, fair enough, the client was paying for them. We wouldn't send them, but we would at our own cost and everything send our other, junior engineer. And the client still said no, because they'll just be a distraction. And
Wow.
I suppose in the end, we asked a third time, we're like, please, we really want to develop our people.
Yes.
And so the client did eventually say, okay, you can send one junior person. And I feel like that just a really simple element of collaborating is not to make that conversation so difficult. Because we all have to train people. Certainly when we think about how we're going to develop our team, we think about how the activities we do, we could share them with our clients. And we'd be very open to our clients also giving us opportunities to learn with their workforces as well. And so one thing is just understanding we've got people from different industries. We've got people straight out of university. We're bringing in people from other countries to help all of us meet this challenge in front of us. Just accommodating the fact that people need to learn on the job to improve would be my very selfish plea, please. It's a really simple way, I think, that we can all, it's win-win for everybody.
I think it's a point well made. Well made.
I might,
Adam, and
I might
go
add
ahead.
to that in terms of what I see. Like, I guess the industry in transmission distribution is very heavily gender biased towards male employees, just based on the history. And what we've found is that we've had a huge amount of success attracting female graduates, female apprentices, and whatnot. However, we've had to get out there and sell the industry from the grassroots up, and we've had programs in place for 5-6 years to start to sort of get out to high schools to promote STEM subjects, particularly for young women, and also scholarships at university and whatnot to promote electrical engineering to young women. And what we've found over the years is that's definitely improved our brand, but also we've helped some young people choose a path that's really exciting in terms of the electrical infrastructure that we've got to develop over the next decade. So I think the industry's traditionally missed out on 50% of its opportunity, and we've got a fair bit of catch up to do. I think also on top of that, around the experiential learning, we're never going to have a bigger 10 years than the next decade in transmission and distribution. And so it's such an amazing time for anyone to be in the industry. And we've found that our more senior staff get really energized by the amount of youth we're bringing into the business. our line workers out in the field who've been doing it for 30, 40, sometimes 50 years are like they get a spring in their step again once they've got the young 18 and 20-year-olds coming through. They get so much energy out of imparting their knowledge, and they've gathered so much knowledge over a long career. We found that it boosts morale out of sight as well. So, I think we've got a very exciting set of challenges ahead of us in terms of creating that capability for the future.
What I thought was very powerful, what I heard you say, that was just as much as basically we have a skill shortage, which is a challenge to all of us, that also presents opportunity for rapid skill development, and that people are given opportunities earlier in their careers they may have had to wait longer for. I thought that was an excellent point. Why don't we run to our next panel question? And the next one that we have here, the topic is just on the very thing of skill shortage. So quite a great segue to all the panelists there. But you speak to many people on the skill shortages, and there's a plethora of views on what we should be doing to solve it. I think the fact remains that it is complex. It's needed to be solved. And I think, Diana, as you rightly pointed out before, to big problems, there's usually multiple causes and multiple solutions necessary to put into the mix to that. Well, what immediate steps, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Felicity, particularly after that last example you gave. But what immediate steps should be prioritised in your view to upskill the workforce and attract new talent into the transmission and distribution sector? We certainly had Adam talk about the need to get out there in front of schools and youth and encourage the opportunities of a career path. But we'd love to hear your perspectives.
I think with the younger workforce, it's not that difficult to attract graduates into the renewables industry. I think it's once they're in there, they realize that, transmission and distribution is a pretty key part of, you can't connect a new wind farm or solar farm without a network. These things all work in harmony with each other. So I think we get a lot of interest, and I get a lot of interest just from colleagues who work in different industries who are, curious about how they can transition their own career, from, say, transport into energy.
Yes.
So I think that for us, and this is probably a bit of a two-pronged approach, because it's not just about developing our own people, it's also about retaining our own people in a very competitive market, is that everything that we do in servicing our clients, we try to view it through how is this a learning opportunity for our people? And then how do our people, get something out of this that directly links their efforts into, a purpose and an outcome that is for the betterment of, the worlds we live in. So I think taking that focus and then making the investment in learning and development is the first step. And then it really is just looking for those opportunities. Probably in contrast to the example I gave before, I know, talking to my colleagues in Sweden, they work with, there's a lot of transmission and distribution companies in Sweden, for quite a small country, but they have some major ones, and those clients won't do business with you right now unless you can explain to them how you're investing in learning and development for the energy transition. And they're looking for opportunities in how, as clients, they can collaborate with our consultants to help the entire industry across the country sort of service or learn and develop and accelerate that learning. So I think there's, probably opportunities here. We're looking at developing at a global level, filtering down how do we, WSP has more than 70,000 science and engineering professionals within it, and more than 6,500 of those people work in power and energy. So how do we work together to build those programs and then filter it down into our individual countries? How do we create cross-collaboration opportunities between countries so people here can see how we do things elsewhere to help fuel that innovation that Diana referred to before, which I think is like cheat. You don't have to be new, just cheat off someone else.
Shameless stealing.
And also I'm very interested, we did in the last probably 6 weeks, I think the deal went through. WSP recently acquired a company called Power Engineers in the US, who have, shafts to they call it power delivery, but it's effectively their transmission and distribution team. They have almost 3,000 engineers. I'm so envious. But they they've developed their own technical programs over the last 3 decades. And so we're trying to get as many insights into that and take all of that material and use it to help, Australia and, our industry and our market and our clients, because, we can't take decades to train people how to do these things. We need them doing it within the decade.
Which just shows, like to Deanna's point earlier about standardization, right? That goes just as much for skills development and methods that work as it does componentry for our assets.
Yeah.
Perhaps another panel topic, if I can, and again, probably turn to you for this one, I think, Adam. I'd love to hear your views on this one as well, Diana. This question was pre-submitted by someone that registered today, so would love to get your perspective views on it. Is how can we balance rapid infrastructure rollouts with sustainable practices like ethical sourcing, carbon management? Could a focus on Scope 3 emissions drive more local and sustainable production?
Yeah, definitely, from a power network point of view, our biggest sort of emission is relating from our poles and wires assets, from the wires. The losses in our system are significant in the scheme of all the customers we serve. So definitely a carbon price would assist us in being able to optimize the assets from a carbon point of view. Do we go an extra size up in conductor size or not? Is it worth the extra few structures to hold that conductor in the air? And I think those types of prices, one thing I'd say about utilities is they're good at optimizing. A lot of people trying to optimize whether that is your investment decision making right the way through to the detailed engineering. And once you've optimized or feel you've got it, you try and standardize that so that you don't reinvent the wheel. The only downside of that approach is that perhaps you leave it too long before you check your input assumptions and re-optimize. And so definitely a carbon price would put some sort of signal out there to allow us to optimize further, and some sort of cost of losses. And that's not factored into our regulatory framework as a direct cost like that, although we do try to reduce losses across our network. I think responding to climate change as well is something that's really topical. The types of storms we've had more recently, we're not necessarily having more big storm events, but they're more ferocious. The wind speeds are stronger. There's much more destruction, a lot of microcell activity within a storm. And so what we're seeing is the level of damage is a lot worse with the higher ferocity and more prevalence of floods. So we've seen 2 across Powercor's network in the last sort of 4 years or 3 years. So, we've done things like build levees around our zone sub assets, relocate some of our smaller substation assets. We've put to our regulator to build bigger poles, higher poles in flood prone areas so that there's less public risk if the flood levels do get high, because unfortunately we've got to put infrastructure to where people live, and if people are living in those types of areas, we've still got to get the power to them. So there's a number of different technologies we're adopting to do it. Wood poles are still by far the best performing asset. And it's pretty hard to believe in the modern day. Concrete poles have a carbon footprint as well. We've looked at different materials like fiber spun concrete, and we've got our asset team constantly monitoring for different materials we can use for our structures. But at the moment, our hardwood timber poles, forested in a sustainable way, are still by far our highest value asset in terms of how long they can last. But yeah, we're continuously looking at recycling poles and those types of things as well, and reusing.
Interesting. And this is such a big topic, obviously, Scope 3 emissions. So thank you very much, Adam. I'd love to hear the views of yourself, Felicity or Diana. Do you have any views on the role of Scope 3 emissions?
actually wanted to add regarding the local production, which obviously will definitely help with, local source, which means don't have to transport materials and equipment for that long, which it definitely is more sustainable. And I would like to say that we see significant interest from local industry in Australia to kind of become part of the transition. So there is interest out there. So in my view, if there is demand, if the industry grows and the demand exists, the production industry is going to step up to the game because they do see the benefit. They do see this is a long-term situation. It's not going to be a peak of war for the next couple of years. So they see this is, we're talking about the next decades of the need presented. And we see that interest. And there is interest on local production. There is interest on green steel, for example. So I do see that changing.
Yes. And Felicity, your views?
Yeah, I mean, I found it interesting. I took from Adam's response. I think it almost, like, in a way, perfectly captured how complex a discussion this is within our industry and how it differs to other industries. So I know that I recently went through a PAS 2080 audit, and I understand in transport and property and buildings, a lot of discussions would be around how you use recycled materials, how do you minimize the use of concrete, how do you minimize the the amount of steel. And then, Adam gave that example that actually to counter losses in the system, she would increase the use of steel. So I think for us, the focus has really just been on generation mix. The networks are focused on minimizing losses to reduce, the impact of, carbon emitting energy or generated energy has been lost in the system. That is the focus. That's the low-hanging fruit. That's the race we're in. At the same time, I think we do need to start having conversations around how do we look at embodied carbon in what we're doing. But it's not that simple an equation, and I think we can't afford to wait for the answers to roll out the solutions we're currently doing, but we can't ignore some of carbon management in our projects either. And so it's how do we find that balance? How do we not make it another barrier to rolling out the things that make the real difference, but still do so responsibly and with a view for the future? Because we'll do this big rollout and we can replace all our coal generation and eventually, replace gas. What comes next and what comes next? So I think we always need to have our eye on that next stage.
I think that's a really good term to use about responsibly. How do we make this transition in a responsible and sustainable fashion?
And fair. People have to pay for their
fair.
electricity. We can't do something that makes it unaffordable for the average person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think it's time for today's webinar that we could turn our minds to some of the questions that we've received from registrants and also for those on the call today. So I might just grab one of our registration questions and please, either panelists, feel free to throw in if you would like to tackle this one. This one's around the topic of resilience and life extension. So I'm going to read the question out verbatim for you. Is what consideration is being given to the resilience and life extension for existing assets and optimizing new asset designs to reduce environmental impact from materials manufacture to operations? Who would like to tackle that one?
I'm happy to tackle that one. So I guess, prolonging the life of assets is twofold in terms of the benefits. It's a cheaper outcome for our communities, and it also results in, less material usage. And if I use, a timber pole is a very simple asset in many ways. It stands there, it's got wires, it gets some wind loading for those engineers out there, and occasionally gets the load of a tree falling across the lines, which is very difficult to design for. So the way we look at that is we can prolong the life of those assets by staking the poles. Most poles from all our research and history break at ground level or just below ground level. So, that's where the pole degrades the most based on our statistical analysis. So we stake it. It's really simple, just two big steel stakes sort of driven into the ground and bolted around the pole at the base. And that's as simple. That'll give you an extra 10 to 20 years on a hardwood pole. Other examples of how we're doing it are to really embrace, I guess, the use of data. And so,
Yes.
when I mentioned AI and machine learning, we had insights, and it took an engineer to probably do calculations and statistical analysis for years to sort of come up with a new way or a new policy. I guess now we've got so much data and so much processing power that we can change based on failure modes. We can change our policies in a heartbeat. And what we found is that just reprioritizes where we put our effort, and we don't throw away perfectly good assets. Probably the last thing is that, our field workers, as funny as, you look at it, we've got a lot of people who live in rural locations and they reuse everything on their farms. A lot of our line workers have farms as well. And, they're really big on saying, hey, this cross arm's perfectly fine. We want to reuse it. And so we've put in processes where they can reuse some of those assets as well, saving us, buying more steel and things like that. So, definitely across our asset base, we're constantly looking at new ways. But I'd say the AI is probably, and prolonging asset life using sort of technology to understand, are we replacing it too soon, is probably the best way that we can squeeze the most out of our assets.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. I might quickly turn to one of our attendees' questions at this one. So I might invite Dana or Felicity if you'd like to tackle this one, but bear with me, I'm going to read this one out as well, so it's come in. What strategies do you see as important to bring the value chain together, as a whole sector, specifically in mind of community and supply chain? Currently, transmission distribution is viewed perceptually separate, yet generation and operations cannot exist with connection and distribution. We're seeing communities comparing benefits between generation and operation versus networks, and it is stimulating increasing angst. Social license outcomes need to be more sector-wide. Any views?
I think this is where government has a really important role to play, to bring players and communities together. And I think that particularly state governments are trying to do that through coming up with the projects and developing renewable energy zones in accordance with AEMO's ISP. And rather than have individual players go to, a community where, somebody who lives, in a location could be approached by multiple renewables developers, multiple networks developers, to try to have a coordinated effort, to try to have clarity around what the purpose of those assets are.
Yes.
I think that there's probably got to be a few regulatory changes as well, because there are constraints in what businesses can and do. So, but yeah, I think this is where governments do it. And then people, all of us within the industry, I see us all having a key role to then feed truth and facts and data and statistics into what drives some of those conversations, because we operate in an industry that, in my opinion, has become way too politicized, and the politics of it often overshadows actually what it is we're doing. So let's just, I'm an engineer. These are engineering problems with engineering solutions. Let's look at that. Let's bring communities in. Let's understand what they need, because the whole point of building these assets is to give electricity to people. It's
absolutely.
It's not just a a trivial asset. It's an essential service that we all need to live our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, let's be clear on what it is, right?
Yeah.
This next question has come from a registrant, which I'll from Ryan, actually. So I'll read this one out. And Dan, I might invite yourself to see if you've got a perspective on this one.
Sure.
And then after that, any panels, please throw in. But this question is, in the race for global resources, a topic very prominent today, talent in particular when it comes to global resources, What geographical locations should we be looking at to source talent? And where do you see the biggest skills gap in the transmission and distribution space at the moment? So, Diana.
That's a good question. Thank you, Michael. Where can we get global resources from? Anywhere, really. There is significant transmission and distribution works happening and have been happening for many years by now in different countries. There is people always open to relocation, collaboration from different jurisdictions. One of the big issues I see there, especially talking more about engineers from one side in terms of certifications, for example, and also blue collars in terms of, again, certifications and licenses to perform the work on site, is getting that international skills and certifications transferable to Australia.
Yes.
Is a big issue. So I think both the industry and the government can definitely work together on trying to streamline that process. So it's easier to transfer resources from one country to another. It's definitely will help to fill those gaps. A good thing about transmission and distribution is, as Felicity said, is an engineering problem. So engineering is the same everywhere.
Yes.
That makes it a lot more easy to transfer skills from one country to another. But yeah, there is interest, there is opportunity, and I think it can be done. It needs to be a bit more, I'll say, regulated probably.
Universal principles, you could say, but if only we had universal methods.
Correct.
And practices and componentry. And what about yourself, Felicity? Would you like to weigh into that one?
Yeah, well, I agree with Tiana, especially the geographic areas to target everywhere. I would take a good engineer from anywhere and have. But also, we don't need everyone to be in Australia to do this. So,
Yes.
say as an example for offshore wind, it's a fledgling market in Australia. There aren't a lot of professionals walking around with a proven experience in offshore wind. But I have links into, talent pools in the UK that do have that. So I suppose we talk about, is it really necessary, from a WSP point of view, where we have these common challenges all around the world? Do we have to duplicate or replicate the solutions in all of the areas that we operate in? No. Where does it make sense, where you need to have people on the ground, and where can we develop our own centers of excellence, where, especially around sort of offshore wind and then the HVDC interconnectors that go with that. I was in the UK earlier in the year talking to my colleagues about, joint recruitment sort of initiatives where we just want these people to exist within WSP, whether or not they hire them, we can hire them in the UK market because that's where these skills do exist. That person themselves, they can stay in the UK, they can move to Australia. We're open. I don't care. I just want access to that resource and knowledge. And then as we get that anywhere into the business, how do we then develop our own people and share that knowledge and work on that truly global scale? So there's no one way to solve this problem. I think we need to be open to lots of solutions.
Yeah, well put, Felicity. And if we squeezed in one final question, Adam, I'll put you on the spot here for a couple of sentence response. Let's see if that's possible, the nature of the question, but just bear with me. When it comes to the construction of transmission lines, there are very few suppliers of the essential materials and even fewer options for lower carbon alternatives. How can we address the decarbonisation of construction in this context?
Yeah, really interesting question. I think it comes down to the design of the assets. Obviously, the less materials you can use, you're going to have a minimal footprint. And certainly around the structural design of lattice towers, that's a bit of an art form and very specialised area of engineering. So that would be the first, and then trying to make that aesthetically pleasing is the other side of it. In terms of sourcing steel, I think you have to be really careful and understand your supply chain in detail to know where your suppliers are sourcing it from, and perhaps have a little more control over that to make sure it's sourced, I guess, sustainably. The other side of it is the amount of concrete that you put into the foundations and footings for towers in transmission. So, I'd see that as the other element that needs to be looked at. It's very easy to be conservative in your engineering. I'd certainly encourage consultants or operators of the assets to optimize those assets. We've used different structures to traditional structures in terminal stations that we've designed in the past, and those structures have performed exceptionally well with a lot less material. So, they're the sorts of things I would be looking for in terms of those types of supply chain issues. I think also the last thing is really around the network losses. You might find that around network losses, there's a lot more to be saved than in terms of the energy used to create the assets. And that might be something that in the future regulators and governments look upon more favourably, and we need a bit of policy change to support that.
Yes. Okay. Well, that probably brings us to the end of today's webinar. I just want to say thank you to our panelists. I have learned a lot from you from today's conversation, and you've really broadened my thinking about the multiples of solutions to this very complex problem. I've really walked away with a great appreciation of the standardization of learning and development methods and componentry. Our conversation. We also had around our supply chain protection and risk management, the use of predictive analytics and Gen AI. I've really got to learn a lot out of hearing each of you speak and sharing your views and experiences. So I would like to thank you. For everyone that joined today's webinar, again, please just know that we will be sending out a recording for you, so you can refer to that later as well. We'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar and hope you've also found today's discussion worthwhile and learned something from it. And finally, we'll be grateful if you could please take a few moments to provide some feedback so we can improve these webinars for you in future. A survey will pop up and on your screen when you leave the call, when you jump off the webinar, and please take the time to complete that. Again, thanks everyone, and we really hope you enjoy the remainder of your afternoon. Thanks for joining us today.